Romulus Whitaker, an Indian-American upbringing, a stint at the Vietnam War, crocodiles, snakes, half-wild pig named Luppy, and an emu named Neelakanthan, herpetologist, conservationist, Padma Shri awardee. Romulus Whitaker is a man who intrigues, awes, and inspires. Studying king cobras has become a driving force. We think it is an excuse to indulge in what he likes doing the most, wandering in the forest. Janaki Lenin's adventures with her reptile-loving husband, Romulus Whitaker, is beautifully recorded in her trademark irreverent style as she writes tales from the animal world.
Hold your book up.
She's the author of My Husband and Other Animals, A King Cobra's Summer, and My Husband and Other Animals Too, The Wildlife Adventure Continues. Our next panelist, Sunita Dairyam, is a social activist, painter, designer, entrepreneur, and tiger conservationist. Sunita Dairyam chose to settle down in her current home, Bandipur, making friends with the creatures of the wild, the villagers, and the tribals. She works to decrease the human-animal conflict and provide relief to villagers whose cattle are killed by the big cats. Welcome. Our next panelist, Harini Nagendra, is an ecologist who examines the factors shaping the social, ecological sustainability of forests and cities in the South Asian context. Harini Nagendra is a professor of sustainability at Azim Premji University. Her previous books include Nature in the City, Bengaluru in the Past, Present, and Future, and Reforesting, Landscapes, Linking Pattern and Process. Seema Mundoli, a senior lecturer at Azim Premji University, has worked with NGOs involved in conservation, mining, land and forest rights, and education in indigenous communities with a focus on tribal areas in the Eastern Ghats. Her recent work examines the relationship between people and nature in cities. Dr. Priya Davidar is a retired professor who received her PhD in zoology under the guidance of Dr. Salim Ali, the renowned ornithologist. She has served on the board of the Wildlife Institute of India, Dehradun, and was a member of the State Wildlife Board of Tamil Nadu. Dr. Davidar conducts ecological research in the Western Ghats and the Andaman Islands. She has published over 100 scientific papers and edited 2 books. An activist in the field of wildlife conservation, she has published over 100 scientific papers and edited 2 books. She is the moderator for today. Thank you. Come, let's listen to what this amazing team has to teach us about the world of the wild, human-animal conflict, and sustainable living.
Good afternoon to you all. It's my great pleasure to moderate this session. I was asked practically at the last moment, so please forgive me if there are some lapses. But the title of the session is Marriages of the Wild, Conservation and Cohabitation. I find that this title is very apt because we are closely tied to nature. And ultimately what happens to ecosystems and species will happen to humans finally. So I thank the organizers of the Mysuru Literature Festival for considering such an important topic and by inviting renowned writers and conservationists. So I'll just give a brief background of the conservation scene as I perceive it at least. And then I'll talk briefly about the authors, and then they'll take over and develop their narrative on how they came about to write such important pieces of work. So as we are all aware, we are in the midst of a 6 month extinction. So species are disappearing rapidly, both on land and water. And this is mostly fueled by the expanding human footprint throughout the globe. So scientists have predicted that we are likely to lose about 30 to 50% of Earth's species by the middle of the century. So what we have is not just a century or millennia, we just have decades to try and salvage what we can. So this is a very urgent situation. So there is an imperative to promote coexistence between humans and nature. That's why the title says cohabitation. Animals and plants are mostly victims of our fear and greed. They're not really competitors, except maybe in a few cases. So it is timely to ask where we are going and to highlight the efforts of individuals in addressing some of the challenges we face with the environment. So the authors here have made tremendous contributions in improving our understanding of nature through their writings and in the media, and in promoting coexistence between us and other forms of life. We extend a warm welcome to them all. So firstly, even though Prithvi has given an introduction, I'll give another introduction to each of them, and then I'll ask them to talk about what motivated their work and where they want to go from now. So first I'll talk about these two young ladies, that is Harini Nagendra and Seema Mundoli, who have written a very important book on trees called Trees and Canopies. So we all know that plants and maybe some microorganisms are most underrated on Earth. But these are the basis of life, actually. So a recent study has estimated that 571 plant species have gone extinct over the past 250 years, and this extinction rate is likely to accelerate due to both deforestation and climate change. And when we go to the urban scene, which they have also tackled, we see that trees that take hundreds of years to grow are mindlessly cut down. So this book that they have written describes many of the trees in India, among which are the banyan, which is a sacred tree actually, and considered a keystone species because it supports so much other life with it. And this book will appeal to readers of all ages. It's a fresh, breezy cocktail that lifts one's spirits and yet sadly reminds us of our loss. And also scientists have seen that large, old, big trees are rapidly disappearing from the Earth's surface. So with these large trees will go a lot of other species as well. So please, can I ask both of you, maybe one after the other, to talk a bit about your book and what motivated you?
First of all, ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಮೈಸೂರಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಬಹಳ ಸಂತೋಷ. Very happy to be in Mysore. It's a great pleasure, especially because my urban research, as Priya and many others here may know, I started my research in 1993-94 on a lot of forest cover in India and looking at forest biodiversity and changes in land use and land cover. But in 2007 or so, I'm from Bangalore, and I got very interested in understanding what changes are going on in the city, because as all of us know, if you can do a quick hand check, I do this often. How many of you were born in cities? Okay. How many of your grandparents were born in cities? Grandparents were born in cities. You can see the change yourselves, right? So we are a nation that is fast moving towards the urban. And I started thinking about how we needed to, if we really need to tackle the issues of biodiversity loss, we can't ignore our cities. This is not to say that conservation must focus on cities, but it can't ignore cities. And up till now, it's been changing in the past 5-7 years, but up till now, conservation is almost exclusively focused on what we thought of as wilderness areas. And there really is no place of wilderness, if you're thinking of wilderness as a place without human beings, but especially so in cities. So with that, my first book, which is Nature in the City, Bengaluru in the Past, Present and Future, which is an ecological history of Bangalore as it changed from the 5th, 6th century onwards. It's very similar to Mysore, but Bangalore is a bit different because Bangalore is at the cusp of the Malnad and the Bailu, the Malnad being the hills and the Bailu being the area that is more similar to the Mysore area, which is sort of flatter. And so in that coexistence of these ecological regimes, how did Bangalore change from what it was in the 5th, 6th century, which is the first time we start finding stone inscriptions and copper plate inscriptions to understand the landscape, to see to where we got of Bangalore today, and what this can tell us about Bangalore in the future. And one of the reasons I'm very happy to be in Mysore is because Mysore, as an old Bangalorean, reminds me so much of what Bangalore used to be in the past. In fact, I just met an old school friend of mine today, and I was saying that we escape, my family and I try and escape from Bangalore as often as we can on weekends and on holidays to Mysore, just because it really reminds us of how Bangalore used to be in the past in a different kind of place. But what interested me when I started writing Nature in the City and then talking to people about Bangalore and ecological changes is the number of people in cities who were very passionate about nature. And that's not probably necessarily surprising, but if you think of it, there are psychologists and journalists who've talked about what they call as nature deficit disorder. They say that if you grow up in cities, starved of access to nature, then your brains, especially as children, get rewired in very different ways. So if you look at nature deficit disorder, what is urbanization in India going to do to that rewiring? At that time, Seema and I started talking about doing a popular book on cities, which is the Cities in Canopies that is here. Unfortunately, for some reason, both of these are not available in the bookstores here, but please do look for them. They're available in other places in Mysore and also on Amazon. But Cities in Canopies is a more popular book on trees, and in this we try to do something very different. We are saying there is the science, but all of us relate to trees or to nature through emotion also. So we have recipes, grandmother's recipes for hair oil that comes from trees. We have recipes for Ugadi Pachadi. We have, memories, we have poems, we have songs, we have history, stories of people, riddles, and the deep science. And so I'd like to end with this, just saying that I think when we interact with nature or with wildlife, it is with wonderment and it is with the science. So how can we marry the two to kind of deepen our attachment to nature in this era of the Anthropocene when we have biodiversity extinction? That is really the focus of what I have. And I'll just end with one thing. We have some nice postcards with some lovely sketches of the book. There are about 50 of them. I don't have more, unfortunately. I'll leave them on the table here. As you're going, the first 50 who want to pick this up, please do.
So thank you, Harini. Thank you very much. One thing I wanted to ask you, with the trees disappearing and the increasing urbanization, are the species, the fauna, is it also changing?
Absolutely, and there's always going to be some fauna that thrive in cities. The pigeons and the crows are very good examples, and the cockroaches. And a number of other fauna, like the urban slender loris, for instance, which is now, it's very difficult to see them survive. But there's also the fact that 40% of our protected areas are now within an hour's drive of cities. So what does this do to wildlife? Leopards, we were talking in the panel, leopards, elephants coming into the cities are going to become an increasingly common thing of the future. And we can't focus on relocating cities outside protected areas. So we have to look at what makes certain kinds of species thrive and certain other kinds of species go extinct from cities. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and it's really great to be here in Mysore. So I never intended to write a book, but when Harini said, why don't we just, I only intended to read books, but she said, why don't we write a book on trees? And the instant answer was yes. And I guess the reason for that is that I am a campus child. I grew up in a campus, in a university campus, sitting on trees, running, not the Bollywood style, but running around trees literally every day almost, having feasts, mango feasts and gooseberry feasts. So somewhere, and I did not follow an ecology or a science-based career, moved from corporate sector to the Croc Bank and to different NGOs. But when we moved to the city, these trees are something that have been a constant. They stand still, of course, but they've also been a constant in my life. Everywhere I've gone, I've been interested in them. But something that happened in Bangalore is that it's known as a garden city. And during the course of our research, during the time I started working with Harini in the urban areas, there were a lot of these development debates that were going on in the city. Every time there was a road construction, a steel flyover construction, anything, the first thing that they would do, the first news we would hear is that X number of trees are going to be cut, and then there's followed by a slew of citizen protests. And it seems to be a pattern that was constantly repeating itself. But we also saw at the same time that as much as there was a concern, there was this push to cut trees, there was an equal pushback from the people saying that we want trees. But many people did not, and we realized that people relate to trees in very different ways. There's a cultural relation, there's an ecological relation to it, there's the science-based relation to it. And we found these very, very interesting ways that people interact with it. It's not uniform. They do, for example, there's a Ficus racemosa gular tree outside my house. When I'm leaving the house in the morning, there's somebody praying on it. In the afternoon, the watchmen are sitting and drinking chai. In the evening, the bats are feasting on the fig. So a single tree had so many multiple uses. And so what we also wanted to look at in the book is the larger question of where do trees stand in the face of development? What is the kind of trade? Do we always have to make a trade-off between a flyover and trees? And what are the ways in which we can get a voice for trees in the city? So there are a lot of debates that we try to address about invasive and exotic species. The eucalyptus is such a much maligned species, but so but there are so many exotics that have also been naturalized. So how can we look at trees from a larger development angle, but at the same time relate to it very personally? So it was, and as for me, the most interesting part was, of course, memories that were triggered, childhood memories, and also doing the archival research. It was fascinating. So we've sort of scored the archives, forest research in Dairyam, the British Library, name it, and we've gone and we've picked up these nuggets about how the Britishers how did they perceive shade, for example? What was their decisions on tree planting? Are we replicating some of this? Does that replication make sense now? And what kind of an outlook do we need to have for trees in the cities, that because urbanization is given now, we are moving into a very urban, so that's possibly the main motivations and the content.
Thank you very much, Seema. One thing I wanted to ask you, trees are being cut in many places, and there's a lot of citizen protest. And the excuse they always give is that they are going to plant new trees. Are the new trees that they plant, are they equivalent to the old trees that they cut down?
So most definitely not. So there are many elements to this. One is that you are cutting a mature tree that provided so many services, and which it had probably taken maybe 60, 70, 100 years to grow, and it has itself become a species that supports so much biodiversity. And what is the point of planting 60,000, so the steel flyover was one example, 2,000 trees were going to be cut approximately, they said they'll plant 60,000 saplings somewhere else. But the pollution is in the cities. So there's really no point in taking the trees and planting them in some other place where there is no, because trees do help mitigate, and the species, the choice of species they use are these fast-growing species often, not maybe more relevant native species.
Thank you very much, Seema. So now I would like to introduce Sunita Dairyam, who's the epitome of a person who thinks globally and acts locally. She's an artist, designer, conservationist who ultimately promotes human-wildlife coexistence through her art, advocacy, and interventions to save species like the tigers by providing compensation for livestock predation. She's a true entrepreneur, establishing temple tree designs whose products many of us sport. In fact, I like going to her shops. And she also has the Mariamma Charitable Trust to support the health, education, and livelihoods of local communities. So Sunita, I'd like you to tell us a bit of what inspires and motivates you.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me here. Not so sure I belong here, but I'm here. Couldn't get out of it, but anyway. I just, stumbled. I'm a wildlife artist, and I just stumbled into my work, actually. It was just because I felt that there was a need to do the work that I do. And since I have lived in Mangla village now for 22 years, it's my home. And I started the Mariamma Charitable Trust purely out of need, really. A member medical charity started a clinic from my farm in the year 2000, and it was then that the bridge between the local people and myself lessened a bit, and they started approaching me for help in taking photographs. At that time, there was no cell phones, and so people started asking me if I could come and take photographs of their animals that were killed by any of the big cats, and I started doing it. And I waited for about 7 years to see if there was any help coming their way. and I realized that there was not. So in the year 2007, I registered the charity, which is the Marima Charitable Trust, which is named after the local temple. So it's, to the local people, it's not really me, it's Marima, who's doing all this work, and it's her that's, so they're able to connect with her much more than with me. And so I registered that in the year 2007, and then I realized, oh my God, what am I going to do about money? I mean, nobody was going to come and help me at all. So I have to mention that it was the Karnataka Forest Department who actually, my life was justified living there, because they're the ones who were employing me as an artist. Every now and again, they would hire me to paint something, and I was able to justify and earn a living being an artist in that area. So I have to thank them for that, that support that they gave me, and until today, they still give that to me. So then I realized that I needed to raise the funds for the work that was being done. So I went and worked in Tirupur for 3 months in a factory to learn the different ways and techniques of making T-shirts and so on and so forth. And then I started designing stuff for that and started selling, and realized that, wow, I was able to earn a living doing this and earning the money for the charity that was needed. So that's what we did. And today I managed to pay compensation for people. And it's just an interim relief, really, because the department does pay compensation. But I try and support the people by giving it immediately. And then they follow the procedures of putting in the application and so on and so forth. And the department gives the rest of the money. And we still run the charity, the clinic for the charity, which is now, we are 19th year going on, and we look after patients from many, many villages around. And we try to help, when we have the funds, we try to help people with education, if we can. There is another organization called Namasanga out there who does support education and other things. So that's what I do, basically. So basically, we just try and be a support to the local people and the local populations there.
Thank you very much, Sunita. One question I'd like to ask you. Are you planning to expand to other areas? I know you act locally, yes, but yes, there's a value in what you do elsewhere.
Yes. Now people from far and wide are actually coming in. And I have to say that I am now in the process of signing an MOU with WWF India. Wow. So we will be working in Tamil Nadu, in the probably about 10 or 12 villages in Tamil Nadu also, which is fairly high conflict. So they will be helping me for a year or two in paying compensations. After that, again, we have the worry of where do we get the funds? Because once I start doing this, so I will be employing more local people in the Mudamalai side. Yeah. And we will be increasing our, and now that, it's been now 12 years, so people are hearing, oh, this is happening. So people are coming from far and wide for help in so many aspects. If not only in compensation, but in 2 days ago, a man was killed by an elephant in a village about 27 kilometers away. It was at 1:10 in the morning. The first people they called was us to call the department, which we did. So it's a little help for the department also.
So try to coordinate between the
quite right, as much as we can.
Very important.
Yeah, as much as we can.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And keep up the good work. So next is Janaki Lenin, who's a renowned filmmaker, journalist, publisher, naturalist, who's the author of the books My Husband and Other Animals, which have received huge popular success. We didn't know, Ram, which kind of animal are you, Ram? So these books are a mixture of stories recounting the adventure and excitement of living with Ram Whitaker amidst a menagerie of animals. So the books are very informative, entertaining, and whimsical, providing startling insights into animal behavior as well as the foibles. Foibles of human nature. It doesn't. Oh, it started, yeah. And with her husband Ram has produced more than a dozen films for National Geographic Television, So Janaki, please tell us about yourself and what motivates you to be so extremely productive and with such a high impact.
Hi, everybody. Hello. I'm not a conservationist like everybody else on this panel. I'd like to say that up first. I'm not a do-gooder in that sense. I like to call myself an agent provocateur. So I ask diplomatically incorrect questions, as my friends will tell you, some of whom are here. So when I first met Rom, that was my first serious window into the world of wildlife and conservation, and I was always intrigued by what these people do. Why do they do what they do? What is this that drives them to give up personal comforts and live in a camp in the forest being rained on and bitten by ticks and leeches? I mean, who in their right minds would ever do something like that? I mean, I still don't know, but so, it came down to one thing. So the one question that runs through everything I write is, are we part of nature or are we separate from nature? And what is nature? How do you define nature? Okay, you could say there are great Indian hornbills, ficus trees, crocodiles, tigers, of course. But what about rats? Are they wildlife? Cockroaches? Fully justified. Yeah. So we have this kind of prejudice when it comes to species. We say nature, but we say some are acceptable nature and the others are vermin deserving to be exterminated. So this whole, the mixed reactions that we have towards nature, quote unquote, it fascinates me. Why do people react the way they do to what's out there? How do they see themselves? What is their relationship to that thing out there? And that's what I do. And I can't claim to have any answers, but it's taken me on a very interesting journey. That's all I can say. Thank you.
So, pardon me. So you grew up in an urban setting, is it?
Yeah, I was
City.
born and brought up in a city, didn't know any wild animal until I met the chief wild animal.
Yeah. So how did you adapt to all these different forms of life, including snakes and reptiles and all that?
Okay,
Has it been
so,
an easy adaptation?
so I'm fundamentally a storyteller. This is all grist for the mill. It doesn't matter if I have to undergo some trauma. Yeah, later on it's always nicer
Makes
in
a
the
good
telling.
story,
Yeah,
as long as
exactly.
there's a story in there.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Now I'll come to Rom. So,
Can you hear me?
so Rom, of course, doesn't need any introduction. And we've known each other since the 70s. And he's always been such a charismatic, creative, outgoing person, extremely adventurous. And he's been made more famous and infamous by the books that his wife writes. So Rom is an inspirational figure for wildlife conservationists, herpetologists. So he was among the first in India to educate people about snakes. Before that, the only reaction you had when you saw a snake was, let's kill it. But Rom, through his work and through the Madras Snake Park and the Crocodile Bank, he reduced public fear about snakes. So this was a tremendous contribution to the conservation of reptiles. And he established the Madras Snake Park, the Madras Crocodile Bank, which has achieved tremendous success in research and education about reptiles. And his latest work is also very fascinating on the variation in venom types, within the same species of snakes in different regions in India. So it's a tremendous insight into snake biology. So one of his landmark achievements was to establish the Irula Snake Catchers Cooperative Society in 1978, which gave a very important source of livelihood to the Irula communities who used to live off catching and selling, killing snakes and selling the skin. But instead now they catch snakes, extract the venom, put the snakes back in nature, and this venom is very important for making the serum anti-venom. So among his achievements are numerous publications and films. He has co-authored The Snakes of India, the Field Guide with Ashok Captain, where 276 species of the currently 302 described have been documented. So he's achieved so much that it will take a long time, maybe half the day, to list all his achievements. But one thing I want to tell you one story very recently. About 2 weeks ago, I live in the jungle with my husband, so we live among snakes and elephants and all that. So our gardener, actually, who's a Irula, he came running and he said he's seen a snake. So I said, what type of snake? He said, oh, it is like that, this thick, long, and with all sorts of things. So then I gave him your book. He was absolutely fascinated, he went leafing through the book, and then he managed to identify the snake, which turned out to be a Russell's viper. So this is the impact that ROM has had on everyone, including people who are illiterate, as we say. I mean, it's not a derogatory term, but these poor people living in the forest often cannot read and write. So I'll let him now talk about his adventures.
I don't know where to begin with all this. I just want to say namaskara, sappa kannada battada, but but since Tamil is my native language, I'll speak in English. I had the great fortune of coming to India when I was just 7 years old with my mother and my stepfather. My stepfather was Ram Chattopadhyay, the son of Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, whom some of you have heard of. And so I'm related to a fantastic, illustrious family, which has served me very well. I go around sort of name-dropping left and right. No, but seriously, I came to India already smitten by snakes. I was 4 years old catching snakes in northern New York State, a little village called Hoosick, right near the Vermont border. And I came home with a milk snake one day, and my mother snapped a picture, and I got that picture to this day of this little brat bringing a snake home. The thing was, my mother didn't say, "Get that damn thing out of here." She said, "Wow, how beautiful." I mean, how could I not love snakes after that reaction from my mother? So it was great. So we came to India, and I think she was a little worried. Now we suddenly arrived in India. Maybe I shouldn't have said it was such a beautiful thing. I mean, this is the land of cobras. But I had a wonderful upbringing. I grew up in Bombay, but I went to school in Kodaikanal. It was then a missionary school, so I got a heavy dose of Christianity. And anyway, we won't talk about that right now. We're talking about real wildlife now. Sorry, I couldn't resist. So growing up in the Western Ghats was fantastic, and I just became a lover of the forest, the jungle, to the great detriment of my studies. I flunked virtually all my subjects. I managed to pass through, sort of scrape through high school. I even went to college in America, and I lasted 1 whole year. Can you imagine? I was shocked that I could actually get through a year of that awful, more studies, 12 years of school and a year of college. Anyway, I quit that and found myself doing all sorts of odd jobs in America, but ultimately going down to a place called the Miami Serpentarium in Florida, the largest venom production center in the world, where my guru, God bless him, Bill Haast, was the owner and operator of the Miami Serpentarium, and I learned virtually everything I knew about snakes from him. And I had this germ of an idea. India is the land of snakes, but we have no snake park in India. So that's really where it started, and that's how I got the idea to set up the Madras Snake Park. So I came back to India in 1969 after doing a stint with the US Army during the Vietnam War. I mean, I just rushed back to India, basically, back home. And the first thing I did was wander around. I set up a small venom production lab outside of Bombay, a place called Gaimukh Bandar on the Godh Bandar Road. Those of you who know the area, it was a very wild place in those days, with leopards around. Still leopards there, by the way. And I then started traveling back down to Tamil Nadu, where I had already learned Tamil when I was a little kid, so it was kind of like a homecoming. And I met the Earls, and this was my peer group, a group of people who really knew snakes well. The fact was, of course, that they were killing snakes for their skins, and as Priya just told you, the skin industry was something we rebelled against because they were killing snakes just in any great numbers. I mean, doesn't matter season or sex or size or anything. They were really slaughtering snakes. So there was a big campaign to stop the snakeskin industry. The Wildlife Act came in 1972, and then they were without a job. So I set up the Madras Snake Park in 1969, and then again, talking about forest departments, in this case it was the Tamil Nadu Forest Department, who said, hey, we've got a national park in the middle of the city called Gindi Deer Park. Would you like a half an acre of land to set up your snake park there? I just couldn't believe it. Here I was still an American citizen in those days, so was it legal for the forest department to give half an acre of reserve for national park to a foreigner? I mean, shh, don't tell anybody. I mean, it was all a long time ago, so it's all been done. Anyway, we set up the snake park, and the first year, 1 million people came through, 1 million visitors. Okay, snakes, maybe people have negative attitudes toward them, but they are fascinated by them. Everyone has to agree that. And yeah, over the years, people started coming around, especially young people, several people who were supposed to be seriously going to IIT, for example, or seriously trying to become engineers, totally dropped out and joined me. One, Dhruva Basu, became Mr. Gharial. He started studying Gharial up in North India. He joined the forest department. Another, Satish Bhaskar, whom you may have heard of, became Mr. Sea Turtle of India. And these are guys who were just palling around with me at the snake park in those days. Those are just two of many who went on to do great things. Probably could be called one of India's first lady herpetologists, Jai Vijaya, who rediscovered a rare species of turtle in Kerala. She was one of the wonderful people who worked with me there. So there's it kicked off quite a movement, and quite a few people got involved. Also, what was happening was I was doing surveys, and I must admit that WWF at that time chipped in grants. We got a magnificent grant of 3,000 rupees. No, wait a minute, in those days it was something. In 1972, 73, it took me to most of the North Indian states where gharial were supposed to still be found, but gharial were almost on the verge of extinction. We could count only 170 gharial left, and that was really serious stuff. We're down to, what might just go extinct tomorrow. So when my ex-wife, Zai Whitaker, and I set up what's called the Madras Crocodile Bank, and a lot of you have probably been there, and this has worked out really well because we started with just 14 crocodiles, and not knowing that crocodiles are actually rabbits in disguise, they started breeding like mad. Okay, go there now, and you can count 2,200 crocodiles, what to do with them. We started releasing them in the wild. We released about 1,500 muggers, many gharial in various protected areas around the country. And as we all know, what was conservation then, I may not like to use the word, has become conflict now. Because there was a whole generation of people who lived without knowing how to live with crocodiles. So really, a lot of conservation now is teaching people how to live with these animals again. And that gets me into the snakes again, okay? Snakes were always my first love, and snake bite is an incredible problem in India. Snakes are very valuable in the ecosystem. It's the only creature that really can control rats. You might think that cats are good rat catchers. Forget it. So cats can't get down into the rat holes and kill all the rats down in there. Snakes do every day. So yeah, they're very, very important. But they're also an animal which has become very common in rice fields and in villages because of various reasons. For one thing, waste attract millions and millions of rats, and of course the snakes follow. So we've got a huge problem of snake bite in India. Snakes kill as many as 50,000 people every year in India. And this figure comes from something called the Million Death Study, which was a really interesting study on the basis of what's called verbal autopsy. Have you heard of this before? It's very interesting. You send a doctor and a social worker to 1 million households and find out what are the causes of death in the family. And this is the data that they came up with. So with 50,000 people dying of snakebite in India and a couple of 100,000 being permanently injured, we've got a big, big problem. And we're now, the Croc Bank and a lot of our partners around the country are involved in a very, very heavy-duty snakebite mitigation program consisting of education and collecting venom samples and testing antivenom and stuff like that. I mean, those of you who are interested, get in touch with me at kingcobra@gmail.com, very easy. And I would really appreciate your association with us in whatever partnership we can build to stop this snakebite problem. Yeah? Okay, that's about it for the moment.
Thank you, Ram. That was really nice. Story about your life and your work. So there is a sort of perception that snakes are declining in the wild. What do you think about that?
Well,
Are increasing?
this thing, snakes, that's a really good question. Unfortunately, there's no census taken on snakes. I mean, we need a good snake census officer to get out there and do some censusing. But yes, certainly in urban areas, snakes are under very great pressure, as are any wildlife. But in rural areas, the snakes that are in trouble are the snakes in forest areas like rainforests, which have been destroyed at a rapid pace. I believe the figure is something like 80% of the high rainfall forests in the Western Ghats have been destroyed over the last 50 years. And these are the places where king cobras, pythons, Europeltids, species of snakes which need particular kinds of habitats can live. Our other snakes like cobras and Russell's vipers, they're very happy in our rice fields.
Rat snakes.
And rat snakes, of course.
Thank you very much to all our speakers. I would now like to throw the questions open to the floor. So if any of you have any questions, yeah.
So I'd like to ask a question about something that was addressed earlier on. So it's related to funding really on conservation. So we see certain animals which aren't necessarily very ecologically important, but say cute, something like say the giant panda, which is literally the face of wildlife conservation, the logo of WWF, which gets millions of dollars of funding each year. But things that are like less cute or less animate, such as say moss or say a small salamander, which are much more ecologically important for the biodiversity of that area, which don't get nearly enough funding. The same goes for trees. As ma'am said, that big corporates, through their CSR activities, they fund fast-growing or aesthetically pleasing trees, but don't really recognize the trees that really do benefit the local ecology the most. So how do you think we can bring more awareness to this issue on funding things that will help the species that are the most ecologically important, will help the environment the most instead of what just looks pleasing? How do you think we'll bring about this sort of awareness?
Why are you all looking at me?
A sharp answer.
One of you can answer this question. It's a very good question because lack of funds for is a critical issue.
Go ahead.
Okay, so obviously we can't speak to all of conservation. Maybe we can try and get a set of opinions between us. But you're very right. I mean, I think this is the catch of dealing with the human side of conservation. We have to speak to the emotion within us, but emotion is also biased. And then we have to figure out how to speak with, to that biased. So a lot of, I think, what ecologists try to do is package it within the concept of keystone species, essentially saying, okay, a tiger or an elephant might get you the money for conservation, but within that you're trying to conserve the habitat that also brings the salamander. But then what do you do about things like bees and butterflies, pollinators? We know we're running out of pollinators. What do we do about frogs? Amphibians are, nobody's going to give you a lot of money for a very nice, exciting campaign to conserve frogs. Yeah, or moss.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Exactly. My question is like, how do we get funding to do this? Like, they are the most important.
You have to write for grants.
Things change with time. Like when Rom started working with snakes and crocodiles, nobody would have given him a dime. I mean, why would you conserve snakes? But now it ranks high on the popularity list. So tastes of people change, things come into fashion, and you do the best you can with it. And I guess my role as a storyteller, I can see my role being of some importance there.
Or
but
films.
also ecologists have to play a bigger role, because when you package it like that, like the keystone umbrella species, and it then becomes so much about that creature. Like Project Tiger in India takes, what, 80% of all our funding? And it doesn't even cover a whole range of forests or terrain that need to be conserved. So we really need to look at other creatures that need help.
Yeah? Oh. I got to leave.
Yeah, Romulus Whitaker has another talk there on crocodiles.
There's
so
a last
we are
question
sorry
for
to
him, ma'am.
lose, yeah.
Can I?
Sure.
Ram,
please
this question is
take
for
the
you.
question.
Not a question, actually. Can you please throw a little bit more light on the king cobra research that you did in the
On the
king cobra research that you did in Agombe?
studies we're doing
Yeah.
now? Yeah, okay. Radio telemetry, you're familiar with radio telemetry. Usually they put collars on animals. If you put a collar on a snake, it's not a good idea because he can't go anywhere. He gets stuck. So you have to insert the radio internally. And it's a very simple operation. It takes about 10 minutes to put a transmitter, which weighs about 25 grams. It has a battery life of 3 years at a range of about 500 meters. So we've done 7 king cobras in Agombe, in Karnataka, where we have the Agombe Rainforest Research Station. And we've got young volunteers there who are incredible. They follow it around. Have you been to Agombe? Go there now. In this time of year, it's incredible. The rain is non-stop. You wash your clothes in Agombe and you take them to Shimoga to dry them out, okay? Yes, it's that serious. It's very serious. So anyway, I'm just giving you some of the trials and tribulations that the king cobra trackers have to face. But the beautiful thing about it, this king cobra telemetry project is unique among all snake projects in the world, because all other snake projects that we've the people who have done them that I've corresponded with, they put the radio in the snake and they check out the location every day. Yes, it goes from A to B, and that's just about it, because snakes are so secretive. Now we've got a snake who's 12 or 14 feet long, who's very visible, and we can see everything that he does. And oh, is it? Yeah. No, it's not. Okay, anyway. It seems to be okay now. So basically, we are able to see exactly what the king cobra does on a day-to-day basis. Luckily, they happen to wake up very conveniently at 8 a.m. Very nice. And they go to sleep at about 6 p.m. It's fantastic. So the guy who's had a rough day all day in the rain can go home, dry off, have some good sleep. Thank you. So anyway, the king cobra couldn't be me. Hello. The point is, we're able to know exactly what the snake does. And just to give you an example, one of the first snakes we tracked, we have code names for them, M3. He was male, so he was M3. During the monsoon, he didn't go out into the rice fields to find rat snake. Oh, first of all, I must tell you, king cobras only eat snakes, okay? Yes, they are, and their name, Ophiophagus, means snake eater. It's a Greek name. Okay, that's the scientific name. So they occasionally eat a monitor lizard, which tells us evolutionarily that monitor lizards are very close to snakes. But anyway, that's a digression. They eat snakes, and this particular M3 ate 26 pit vipers during a period of 2 months during the monsoon, the first monsoon that we followed him. And these guys who are tracking them got to see every single predation. And they've got an incredible sense of smell with that long tongue of theirs. And a pit viper would crawl past, and the king cobra would sense where it was. He'd follow it up a tree, even follow it swimming across a stream, and find that pit viper, catch him and eat him. I mean, once this king cobra's on the trail, that guy is out. That pit viper hasn't got a prayer. Anyway, so that gives you a little idea of, okay, but you're welcome to come to Agumbe, all of you, and join in. You can become a volunteer on the King Cobra project, and you'll be very welcome. Try not to come during the monsoon in your first visit, okay? Okay. Okay, please do. Thanks very much. I've got to zip out and talk to some children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rom. We can take about 2 or 3 questions, short questions. If anyone else, yes, please.
Hello. Well, there are 3 concepts that bug me, and any one of you can answer this question. The first one is the concept of ahimsa, non-violence even with animals, and so. And it's a sacred kind of a concept. It has religious connotations as well. This is one. The second one is struggle for existence, where you find each animal a kind of a predator to another animal. And so it's one animal killing the other, which goes completely counter to ahimsa. And this is a creation of nature or God, whichever way. The third is that today we realize that even plants have feelings and the trees have feelings. Now, that means you cannot cut any plant. You're committing a kind of murder. Now, with these 3 in mind, I don't know how to reconcile them, but the question is, how do we live? Tell me, please.
The issue is that we are part of the food chain. We are also another animal. We are a species, so we have to eat plants or animals or whatever to survive. We are not gods or beyond nature. We are part of nature, so it's individual choice, I think. We feel badly that we have to kill some spinach or something and make a palak, but what to do? No answer.